Hello everyone and welcome to the third in our Adam Smith Business School webinar series on coming through COVID sustainably. This hour we're going to be focusing on some of the HR and people management issues that we have faced in organisations and businesses across the UK and more broadly, and also look at some of the experiences and possible ways forward as to what we're going to learn from this experience now and in the future. So I'm absolutely delighted to invite four fantastic panelists to join our discussion today, and I'll just ask those panelists to put their videos on so you can see them now. So first of all, we have in no particular order, we have Maria, and Maria Cairns is Managing Director of People and Retail Deposits at the Cooperative Bank. Now, Maria sits on the executive committee of the Cooperative Bank and has more than 20 years industry experience, including extensive banking knowledge and a strong record both strategically and operationally. Her significant experience of managing a range of channels and businesses and consistently driving P&I performance has led to her current position, which provides her with a platform to deliver those exceptional results through a deep understanding of markets and leaderships and of course of people. Thank you for joining us, Maria.
Thank you.
Lee Panglia is head of CIPD Scotland and Northern Ireland, and Lee is responsible for ensuring that the CIPD is the voice of the people in development, and that the CIPD strategy reflects both their diversity and expertise in policy and the economic landscape and members' agendas across both of those devolved nations of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, with over 20 years experience commercially across the consumer, retail and professional service sectors across the UK, Lee brings significant personal experience of the world of work to her current role and to the panel today. Lee speaks on a wide range of people and development related topics affecting profession, and she also helps to develop those relevant insights and propositions to amplify the CIPD's voice to continually enhance their support of over 11,000 CIPD members in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And it's an absolute pleasure for you to join us here today, Lee.
Thank you. Nothing like hearing your profile read out loud in front of you.
Your best self, yes. Now, I'd like to turn to Martin now. Now, Martin Booth is Executive Director of Finance at Glasgow City Council and Strathclyde Pension Fund, and he's been in the post since May 2018 after spending 8 years as Director of Finance and Corporate Services at Glasgow Life. Now, prior to this, Martin worked for the Convention of Scottish, now I'll correct me if I'm wrong with this, Martin, Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, is that correct?
That's correct.
Fantastic. Where he led on negotiations with the Scottish Government over financial settlements and drafted the Concordat. Prior to this, Martin was Managing Director of Isoplan and previously worked in management consultancy for IBM and PwC. Martin started his career as a trainee accountant with Glasgow District Council and worked for a number of local authorities before being part of the senior management team that opened HMP Kilmarnock. So it's an absolute pleasure for Martin to join us here and all the experience that he brings. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks.
And finally, but certainly not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Belgin Oke-Somerville, who is a lecturer and member of faculty in human resource management here at Adam Business School at the University of Glasgow. Now, she is a work psychologist by training, and her research focuses on understanding skills utilisation, well-being at work and career development, particularly of new entrants into the labour market and young workers. She's recently been part of the leadership team organising an online conference on young people's work and employment and careers, which was funded by the Economic and Social Research Council and the European Association of Work and Organisational Psychology. And alongside leading programmes on human resource management in our degrees here at Glasgow University, she's also programme chair for the International Academy of Management Teaching and Learning Conference. So welcome, Belgin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm sure that no one really wants to hear from me rather than the panel here. So I'm going to really kick off with a question about some of the key issues that have been on everyone's mind as we go through COVID-19. Now, the health and wellbeing issues that have circulated around COVID-19 we know are pretty huge and well documented. And this includes the collapse of work and non-work lives and caring responsibilities, and also everyone trying to perform in quite stressful working conditions. But what I wanted to do was really kick off and ask, what are some of the more surprising people-related issues that you've experienced in your various roles? And I'd like to turn to Martin, because I know that you lead a team of 1,500 people, so I can imagine you've experienced a number of these issues that you both expected and were unexpected.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. Yes, it has been a really unique period, I think, for all of us. I don't think any of us ever expected to have to live and work through this. And the kind of resilience and just kind of can do, get it done attitude from our workforce has been incredible. During the early stages of lockdown, there's lots of media and talk about key workers and NHS workers and shop workers and whatnot. And there's also a lot of other people that are really key workers that maybe didn't quite get the profile others got in media. But they were every bit as important, and actually making sure that people are paid, suppliers are paid, that the over £100 million of business grants that were given out in Glasgow were all processed, that pensioners were paid, that people got support to apply for benefits and support with managing their debt at a time when some people's lives really were turned upside down was equally as important. So right from the start, we had a number of key staff that had to come into work because certain systems are controlled in such a way that they can't be accessed from outside work. Also a massive number of people who switched almost overnight to working from home. People's resilience to do that. I'm kind of in the fortunate position that my kids are old enough not to need to be educated or looked after. But lots of people, maybe where there was 2 or 3 people in a household all trying to work from home and at the same time educate children. I'm aware of people that where couples worked in a shift pattern. So somebody got up really early and did a few hours work and then educated the kids while somebody else got up later. They worked while their partner educated their children, and then later on in the day they switched off, and then people with the partner that didn't get up early then working into the evening to get all of their work completed. And that kind of resilience, and actually you really see at first hand staff that are prepared to go that extra mile to make sure that things are done. I have absolute admiration for the way people have managed that situation. Working from home brings its own challenges, and I think we'll probably cover that later on. But it's just, people's resilience, it's been incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of resilience has come up time and time again, and also the way that people have negotiated these new work colleagues that are, now partners and children and dogs has really been a key issue. Yeah, I'd like to turn to Lee to ask the same question from your kind of your personal, but also your professional role as well. Some of the surprising aspects that have come up.
Thanks, Kat. It's really interesting to use the word surprising because that can mean such a lot of different things, can't it? And I guess working for the professional body for HR, what other people might find surprising, we might not, or I might not, because it's good practice, and a lot of the people that engage with us and talk to us, a lot of our members are delivering good practice, but I know that that's not the case everywhere. These are harder folk to reach. To pick up on Martin's point about resilience, that there's what has come to light is that everyone's experience has been really individualistic for this. So at the very beginning there was a lot of chat about everybody's in the same boat. Well, I don't think people have been in the same boat. And a colleague said to me earlier, and I wrote it down because she said we're in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And I think right from the kind of earliest point, we've had to recognise that as HR professionals and as line managers and people managers, that everybody's position is different. Whether the folk that Martin was referring to, they are about how they ran their family in difficult times would be really different to some of their colleagues. And that was I think quite surprising to most, that it really put the kind of focus on the importance of line managers. And we've said that over and over again as a professional body for years, and others, the importance of the role of line managers, but this kind of highly individualistic experience, that kind of importance of how people are managed and the relationship that individuals have with their people manager is just been hugely important and continues to be, so that individuals are that their performance is managed in the appropriate way, that the right discussions are taking place about their well-being, how they are, how, it's just meant that there's been that, as I said, greater focus on how we manage line managers, and that kind of relationship around performance. I think that's kind of very much at an individual level. And I know that some of those topics we'll talk about later, so I don't want to say too much. I think at a kind of business community level, there's been great surprise at how well remote working has worked and home working has worked. I think for those that maybe weren't very au fait or very positive about the opportunities of people working remotely or for home or working in just different patterns or places of work, I think there's been a great surprise amongst many as to really how successful it has been. And even looking at CIPD as an employer, we're a big SME and really quite forward thinking, I think. We've now got a customer service department that's working really well from home. That, my goodness, we never in a million years thought that they could do that. It was never considered before until it had to be, and now our net promoter scores are up, and our, all the positive indicators are there for something that's had to happen. So that kind of focus on productivity, and those that said that there's going to be a real dive in productivity because people are working in a different way, and actually the evidence isn't there. The worrying thing is more around burnout and people bringing too much of themselves to work or working in patterns that aren't sustainable. But we've not really seen everybody out sunbathing or watching TV during the day, which has had a negative impact on productivity. Yeah. So those are kind of the surprises I would like to highlight.
Yeah. That's a fascinating point you make about the line management role, and I'd like to return to that later on. But I saw Maria nodding vigorously in this idea of kind of the same storm in different boat. And it's been quite a long storm. We're in month 6 now of working from home for many people, and there's almost a kind of new wave of challenges that we're experiencing surrounding managing people. So what do you think are some of the kind of the longer term people management risks that we might face in your organisation or in organisations more broadly, Maria?
Yeah, and I think I agree with everything that's been said so far. During COVID-19 for us, the priority was responding to customers' needs. So protecting colleagues was all around making sure that we continued our banking service, and we kind of focused on this working together but stay apart message, but the kind of immediacy, the kind of scale and longevity, I think has surprised all of us, and I think, as kind of Lee mentioned, everybody responded very quickly in a day one environment, and actually it was quite black and white in terms of what needed to be achieved in day one to get everybody working from home quickly, and that's been really good, led to really good resilience, and we've done things that we didn't expect. But I think what it's shown us as we've kind of moved into the 6 months is you can't take a one size fits all approach to this. Colleagues respond very differently to their work environments. And you can't assume that you know how people are feeling. So we used a forum, a colleague cooperative forum we've got, which included colleagues from across the business to try and take their feel on exactly what we should be doing. So to be guided by what colleagues felt rather than what we thought was right. And actually what they told us were people have very individual approaches to how they're dealing with home working. And there are issues and challenges around loneliness, anxiety, depression, mental health. We did a full staff survey which focused specifically on the challenges of home working and how we could respond to it. And I think what that drew out was that different colleagues need different things. So again, it's around leadership and understanding people's individual needs, but we tried to adapt to that. So if colleagues felt they couldn't work from home for a sustained basis, we provided office space for them. If we felt that colleagues were particularly vulnerable, we created a programme of kind of proactively reaching out to those colleagues, you know, making sure that they are genuinely supported during it. You know, at times it's just a kind of compassionate, friendly voice that people need, and it's sometimes not necessarily doing it through video conference. It's finding different ways of communicating. We obviously, you know, as a nationwide organisation, we introduced things that responded to customers' needs. We had a new help at hand app, so colleagues had access to GP services. We had an employee assistance service that we launched for everybody. So we've done lots of things to try and help and support, as well as lots of elements of creating new methods of that water cooler chat. So trying to replicate that meeting people in the corridor, that having a chat around the coffee machine. You know, so we've had lots of kind of corporate events that we've done across the bank. We've done local events. We've done a coffee meeting where there's no conversation about work. It's just about having a chat about the weekend. We've tried to introduce these things to mitigate the elements that home workers were telling us. But I think the most interesting part for me was in our home working survey that we sent out to all colleagues. What we found more clearly was challenges with colleagues who were having to work in the office. So those key workers who we couldn't allow to work from home because of using payment systems and banking systems and had to be in the office, was actually some of the challenges that they felt because they weren't able to work from home. So I think it all goes back to really knowing and understanding what it is that your colleagues need and adapting your style to respond to it, accepting that things change regularly. So having regular touch points, regular feedback, being able to respond quickly is kind of key to this. And I think that the long-term implications will be around making sure organisations have got those mechanisms and feedback loops in place so that they don't assume that they understand what colleagues need, but actually they're kind of very close to and have got a real clear sentiment of what the business needs to do to respond to help and protect.
Fantastic. And the word that really came up to me there was the loneliness that a lot of people were feeling in isolation, and by comparison to some of the ones that Martin was talking about when you're working from home with children, where actually the idea of isolation might seem like a dream to many. So it's a very individualistic approach. And I wonder if I could just turn to Belgin to pick up on that idea. So your research is in young workers and youth employment. What do you think? Do you think loneliness has been particularly notable or experienced for that cohort, or is it a kind of more generic experience?
I think it's a bit of both. For some within that cohort, it's probably experienced quite strongly. And when we talk about the younger cohort, we're talking about both people who may have been at work at the start of lockdown, but also a lot of the young people are actually at a stage where they're trying to get into work, and so that's and they've been kind of left out of the labour market or have been furloughed as well. So in terms of loneliness, young people are at a stage where they're trying to form their work-related identities and identities in general. And part of that identity we receive is from the information we receive ourselves, is from other people and how we interact with other people. And when we can't do that, we actually struggle to form a healthy image of ourselves and question the purpose that we serve. So the issues alongside loneliness, I think, is one of purpose in life as well, especially for young people who may not be in a stage to pick up the work they may be doing, or maybe they were wanting to do online or without work at all as well. So loneliness and I think issues to do with purpose in life and identity formation comes quite significantly for young people.
Great. And I think you mentioned kind of the idea of purpose, and also, you know, there's not just the challenge of getting in an organisation for young people, which I think is going to be a huge issue in the coming years, but also getting on. And I guess it'd be interesting if I could turn to this idea of kind of career development in lockdown, because a lot of the career development that is undertaken is kind of ad hoc. It's being in a place, it's being able to see what, you know, people are doing, and of course when you're working at home, that's impossible to do. Martin, in your team, how have you kind of tried to counter you know, these aspects surrounding career development and looking after perhaps those graduates or people at the beginning of your career in terms of mentoring or career development?
Yeah, no, that has been a real challenge. We at the start of lockdown, we were an office-based organisation. We had very few people home working. We didn't have all that many people that were even equipped to homework. And a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when there was the beast from the east, I remember we had people working from home for a couple of days, and it was disastrous. And that was with a few hundred people trying to log in. We've now got about 5,000 people across the council working from home on an ongoing basis, and it's actually worked really, really smoothly. So actually the progress that we've made has been fantastic. That started off mostly with conference calls. Actually, there's advantages to conference calls over video calls, because you can walk about when you're in a conference call. You can, if it's sunny, which it was at the start of lockdown, you can wander about the garden or whatever, or even just move about the room. Video calls, you're kind of tied to your seat, and that's not great for people's physical health. But the ability to see people, I think, is really important. The kind of performance management side of things, you know, I think there's been positive things from that, because I think it's made people, I'm sure all of my management team are really good and focus on outcomes and how things, and none of them are micromanagers. But the reality is there will be somewhere that are micromanaging, and that's far more difficult in this environment. So in some ways, we're helping managers to become better managers by focusing on the right things. But that and doing, you know, we really support a kind of coaching and mentoring mindset. Setting up a formal, you know, feedback session or something you can do by a video call, but it's the informal stuff. It's the, I'm struggling with this, and I actually just need to ask the person that sits in the desk across from me how I do this and how I get support to do this, and that can happen really informally. And actually, in my mind, that's where you do most of your learning and most of your experience. And replicating that in this environment is really, really difficult, because actually you can't do it that informally. You have to actually call somebody up or whatever. So how we replicate that going forward, with a view that we will have a different structure. I don't think we'll ever move back to, I don't think we'll ever become fully home working. I think there is some tasks that are less efficient. So it will be some sort of, and I'll avoid it, I was about to use the term blended learning, but that's not a popular phrase. But some sort of mixed model, which builds on the flexibilities and the advantages, but takes away some of that isolation and loneliness. As Belgium was just saying a moment ago, the impact on young people has been quite significant, and that development thing for young people is really important, and that we're able to give people that support to build their knowledge base and to develop is really, really important. So we need to develop some sort of mixed model. We're doing it as best we can just now, and it's something we talk about as a leadership team a lot, about speaking to people and making sure we're in contact and we're providing encouragement and support. But the informal bit is almost impossible to replicate, I would suggest.
Yeah. And I guess that's maybe a good time to turn to the role of the line manager and the supervisor that Lee mentioned earlier as being probably vital in this facilitation of career development. I wonder if I could just turn to you then, Lee, to think about that in terms of this this line manager role, and what are some of the challenges that line managers have been facing, and effectively almost trying to do everything in some way, you know, trying to do the career development, the day-to-day firefighting, the eye on performance, and so on and so forth.
It's so I'm thinking about it from lots of different angles. I could think about it from CIPD, and I could also think about it from myself. because and if I start with me, because just reflecting on some of the things that Martin was talking about. So I manage a remote-based team. So our head office is in Wimbledon, and I manage a team across Scotland and Northern Ireland. We're all home workers. We've always been home workers. I've never worked for CIPD. I'm part of the head office structure, but I've never been part of an office. We're home workers, we're remotely based, and I've managed remote-based workers for some time. And I think when we went into this situation, it was always like, you know, this is business as usual for you, Lee, and your team. And it hasn't been, which has been really interesting to reflect on. Because as a line manager, you know, we're faced with such different things, and we're having to manage in a different way. So even though our place of work is still the same, we're dealing with so many different issues. And we've learned quite a lot as a team about how we connect socially. So we've never had those water cooler moments, because we're all in Stirling, Belfast, I'm in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and you name it. But we've kind of engineered those in a way now, in a way that we didn't do before. So even those of us that have worked remotely are learning. So we do 11s every day as a team, which I kind of thought was a bit of a silly idea to start with, but it's really working well. It kind of, that sort of being able to connect informally in a way that we hadn't before. And there's lots of really good examples across organisations and teams where they are managing to kind of replicate as much as you can those kind of, you know, standing by the coffee machine or water cooler moments. I think that there's a big piece for line managers, which is new around that kind of real focus on compassionate management. I think that in managing in a different way, so with a real focus on people's well-being, which we might not have necessarily needed to call out before, which is that kind of focus about what I was talking about people being seen as individuals. So we're line managers, people managers know more about the home setup and people's families and situations, and are asking things in a different way more regularly, we hope, that actually only good things will come from it. But you're right, Kat, there is a lot more expected of people managers. It's those running virtual one-to-ones that have to be more structured and organised rather than sitting next to somebody and asking them things. It's that connection socially, to try and engineer that in whatever way possible. It's around how you manage output and performance. So there's been a real shift, which I think is a good thing, towards kind of more regular touch points, but actually looking at objective setting for shorter periods. So at CIPD, we're not looking at goal setting for 12 months, we're goal setting for 90 days. That for us as an organisation. So those are all additional things that line managers are needing to address. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned the idea of compassionate management, but also keeping an eye on those output and performance. And I guess that perhaps brings up the thorny issue of performance management. And I wonder if I could turn to Marie here, because it has been something that a lot of business leaders and HR leaders have been discussing. So on the one hand, we want to make sure that we take into account this unique experience, but on the other hand, we know that we're kind of on the cusp of an economic downturn, and where performance is going to be scrutinised at every level in organisations. So I was wondering just if I could turn to you, Maria, and think about at the cooperative bank, where you have multiple levels of individuals, so from you know, kind of professionals with multiple degrees working in your highly technical areas, right down to kind of customer services roles, how you've kind of approached this or thought about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our aim throughout all of this has been to provide our customers with the service that they expected, despite you know, everything that was going on around our colleagues. And I think we've been absolutely blown away with the compassion that our colleagues have shown to customers. So, you know, we genuinely have felt as though our colleagues have provided above and beyond service throughout the whole experience, almost despite what's been going on around them and despite what's been expected of them. I think in terms of performance management, which is what it always comes down to, so it always comes down to the outputs and the way in which you are delivering. We have a really strong performance management framework, and I think that is tested through situations like COVID, because it exposes if you've got any weakness within that process. And actually, I think we therefore are really pleased that our performance management process and procedures have stood up to the pandemic, because I think we always had compassion and values and ethics at the heart of the way we managed. You know, we've got a very clear process for performance management, for one-to-ones, for training, mentoring, coaching. And actually throughout the pandemic, we've really doubled down on this. So it's about not just making sure that you have your one-to-one, it's making sure you have more than one. It's making sure you have more checkpoints. It's making sure that mentors don't take the opportunity during this kind of 3-month period to suggest there's pauses to that activity. It's actually really doubling down on that support. And as I said, we focus very much not just on what colleagues deliver, which is, you know, KPI driven, across all levels of the organisation. We're very clear on what colleagues have to deliver for their performance, but it's also about how they've delivered it. And actually the one thing we've seen during COVID is almost all of our colleagues have moved upwards in the curve in terms of that, how they've delivered their objectives. So it's maintaining focus. I think the one thing that has changed, and the one thing we'll have to think about taking forward, is the focus on leadership, and what leaders have had to deliver during COVID has just taken a real step up. So throughout normal performance management, leaders have to be open, transparent, very clear on what we expect colleagues to deliver, but also how that links into the bank's overall scorecard and objectives. So there is a real understanding of transparency. But the depth has been around leaders understanding much more about their teams. So what pressures colleagues might have personally around home working situations, around shielding, and understanding really in detail what support colleagues need, and making sure that we can kind of step in and give them what they need to achieve their objectives. From a people perspective, we want all of our colleagues to achieve their objectives, because that means all of us collectively are holding hands and providing the best possible service to customers. So I think what COVID has allowed us to do is really test whether our process works, and I think we're thankful that it has stood up to the pandemic, but it's taught us that leadership has had to step up in terms of the depth of knowledge we have of what can stop colleagues being able to perform their best selves at work. And I think that's really where we will take learnings into the future.
You're on mute, Kathleen.
Sorry, schoolboy error. I was just going to turn to Martin there about kind of leadership, because obviously you lead a large team, and I was going to just ask for if you had any kind of personal reflections on what you were going to take in terms of going forward surrounding this, some of the points that Maria raised there.
Yeah, no, I think I've got a really, really strong leadership team. Yeah, I think work really hard on all of those matters all the time, in quite a big department where it's that cascade thing that's really important, and I think that's probably become slightly more challenging when you're not seeing people to the same extent. But I think it reinforces all of the things that we should be doing all of the time. I think it reinforces the need for us to empower our people to be able to make decisions. It empowers our people to look at processes and at how they can do things more efficiently. I think quite often we're caught up in, but we've always done it this way. So as in the past, we had to have a wet signature on such and such a document before we could possibly process it. And actually now we're accepting an email from a trusted partner as a way to go forward. So it's that flexibility around how we do things. and actually bringing that flexibility into how we do things, into how we manage people is really important. That we build that kind of trust and understanding to allow people to actually make decisions that impact on how they can do their job better.
You mentioned flexibility, and I guess I'll turn to Belgium there, because I know that some of your work has explored flexibility. Do you think that the flexibility that we've asked, or that our employees have given us, is going to come at a cost in the long term, or do you think that this is something that organisations and people can uphold as we look long term into the post-COVID world of work?
That's an interesting question. I guess if we can distinguish between flexibility of people and flexibility for people at work, we might be able to think about the more long-term consequences of the flexibility people have shown. So for instance, some of the discussion we've heard so far where line managers and leadership taking more interest in employees, taking more interest in the circumstances employees have been performing, and then trying to come up with ways of then trying to hit KPIs this way or performance targets this way, clearly shows there's some emphasis for flexibility for people. So making sure we're taking care of the people while also trying to kind of achieve targets. Whereas if we go with the flexibility of people approach and expect people just to be flexible and disregard the conditions that they perform under, then that's, I guess, quite an unsustainable approach to go with. And that kind of brings to my mind some of the issues we've been talking about recently in terms of health and safety at work. And oftentimes we found that managers or leadership would find it easier to understand what safety refers to at work, but they would often struggle to understand what health means and how they would maybe maintain the well-being of employees. Whereas we've clearly shown in the last few months that there is emphasis not only on physical well-being, keeping safe, but also physical well-being in terms of, you know, our posture and sitting down, but more importantly, psychological and social well-being of employees that kind of comes with that flexibility. And I think that's that distinction between flexibility for making sure the social and individual well-being is there, but also trying to achieve targets is making a difference in sustainability, if that makes sense.
And I think that really kind of hits the nail on the head in terms of what Martin and Marie were talking about, in terms of that, you know, having to provide that customer service and that customer focus that perhaps requires one form of flexibility, whilst at the same time looking after your employees that perhaps requires a different kind of flexibility. And it's really a tension that people managers and leaders have to negotiate with the best of intentions in day-to-day practices.
Yeah, absolutely. And while doing that, I guess we should also acknowledge that these line managers and leaders are also going through their own personal crises related to COVID as well, which is another layer on top of all of this.
Yeah.
If I can come back there, Kat, you know, I completely agree with that. And flexibility is very much a two-way street, and actually making people's work-life balances better is really important. One thing that I'm very aware of, you know, virtually all of my team are off, or would have traditionally been office-based. So they are people now. They work in an office. They answer telephones. They work on computers, and all of these things can be done from home with the right technology. But within the wider council, we have a vast number of staff who can never be in that position. And there's been a couple of comments come through the chat about looking at people in different backgrounds. So you can't homework and empty a bin. You can't homework and be, well, a home care worker by definition does work at home, but not their own home. So actually we need to be really careful as well as we go forward that we don't create a real rift between the workforce, between those that have got lots of flexibility and can, you know, suit their working hours around their childcare or their other caring responsibilities or their personal way they want to work, and other people that we're still insisting that they have to work very particular hours because that's the needs of the service. So that's a real kind of balance that I think we all need to think about to ensure a suppose, fairness and equality going forward.
Yeah, and I was just going to bring you in, Lee, because I noticed there was a wry grin on your face when some of those points were being made. So yes, please.
And I don't think anyone has all the answers at the moment, but I guess it's about thinking broader than just homeworking. So it's, you know, there's so many different aspects to working flexibly that isn't just about being based at home. And I think there's a danger that because of what we've been through and continue from many of us to still be sitting in our houses right now as we do this, that the focus is just on the kind of place of work rather than all the different elements that we could consider around being more flexible and offering more flexibility, whether that's shift patterns or days that you work or whatever that could look like. And there's some really interesting work, some really good examples taking place, and some really interesting work, I think, that will be focused on around how we do things differently at the back of this. So it's just not about where you work, it's how you work, when you work.
I think that's a great point, and I think the openness that organisations are showing in terms of thinking and rethinking their practices as a result of COVID is a very positive step as well. I'm aware of time, and we've got some questions coming in, but I wanted just to turn to Maria before we go into the questions, to ask and pick up on that point of, you know, organisations being open to change and thinking differently. And what do you think will be the one thing that your organisation will take forward from those lessons that have learned in COVID? And that could be excellent practice, or it could be something that perhaps hasn't worked out the way that you thought or had unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I think in some ways we haven't moved back into working from the office on a pilot basis or on a temporary basis. So we are still in that kind of middle period. We're kind of over the urgency of stage one. We're we're managing and we understand how to respond to our customers, but we're not in our permanent state yet. So I think it's probably a little bit early to take our lessons, because there is still quite a long way to go on the COVID journey. I think I take a lot of pride in what the colleagues have achieved at the Cooperative Bank, and I think I take a lot of pride in the culture that we've created. So I think the main thing is to keep focusing on the positive things we've got, but actually to take forward that personalisation. So what we've understood about our colleagues is a much deeper knowledge of what they need and how we can respond to them. So I think we definitely want to maintain that as we go forward. But I think we will have lessons when we are able to be in a more stable position from a working place environment, when we've got our offices back open again. And I think it's really important to make sure that we look at everything that's happened from the start of the pandemic through to the potential second wave, and we really test from customers and colleagues' viewpoints where we succeeded and where we needed to step. So from a personal basis, I'm really happy. The thing I will take forward is the deeper understanding I've got of our colleagues and what they need. But I think for us, it's probably a little bit too soon to be making off kind of final announcements of COVID.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, we've got a good bit to go before we even see ourselves as coming through. I think the storm's still very much upon us.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have come through, and I'm going to kick off with a question from Andrea Muscat, who's asking, thinking about the ideas that we were talking about surrounding working from home and also young people, and thinking, what kind of soft skills should young people develop if they actually want to succeed in working from home? So I guess it's kind of asking about people who are going into the labour market, who are going into this new working environment. What kind of soft skills do they need to be developing, do you think? And I'm happy to turn to anyone who would like to address that point.
I think most young people come with massive advantages because, and I'm massively generalising here, which probably means I'm wrong right from the start, but I think most young people come with much better technical and digital skills than their older colleagues. So you're kind of pushing at an open door from that point of view. To me, the important element is that building personal relationships and the interpersonal skills that I perhaps would suggest that older people maybe are more skilled at than younger people. And actually, as you go through your career, that becomes ever more important. So it is about not just thinking about technological skills or digital skills. It's making sure that you build relationships and you build those personal skills as well. So I think they've got lots of advantages in a new world. But
I think that's a fantastic point. I was speaking to a group of executives, and they were talking about how we need to move from thinking about technology not as a hard skill anymore, but actually a soft skill, because you have to combine those kind of development aspects alongside the technical capabilities and competencies of using multiple platforms now. I mean, I think, come February, if you said, what does Zoom mean? People would have thought, well, it's a cartoon noise. And now it's, part of everyone's vocabulary. So
nice, lovely.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, from the 80s. Yeah. And Lee, could I just turn and ask from your perspective what you think some of those soft skills might be?
I'm not sure if I have much more to add than what Martin said at the moment. I think I completely concur about the kind of the making assumptions that most younger folk are better with the systems and the different tools that we have to use now to connect. And I'm making another assumption that they may benefit more because they're used to kind of connecting and building relationships through other social platforms. And as teenagers and young people, I've got 2 teenagers, they're far better at connecting virtually and have, because that's just kind of what they're used to. So that's, I have, I think that the worry, if I'm allowed to use that word, is around that kind of relationship building, and the longer that this lasts, that we're not connecting face to face, that younger generations of people entering the workplace will struggle a little bit when we do go back to a world where many more of us are in the office. I'm not sure if I have the answer though around the kind of skills on top of what Martin's saying. I think that there's some real challenges when we look at kind of talent acquisition, so, and talent management over time. But that's not necessarily for younger people, that's for kind of all ages in the workplace.
Yeah. And Belgian, I think you wanted to pick up on some of those points there.
Yes, I think I agree with the positive sides that the advantage young people have in terms of maybe using technology, also maybe using technology better for social interaction as well. But that's if we assume young people have stable employment and they don't need to worry about their future going forward in terms of career development. I think we could maybe add what Martin added early on in the discussion, the word resilience being even more important for young people today, because we know young people are more vulnerable, especially when it's time for economic downturns. And at the moment, as you've said, Kat, we are, if we haven't entered already, we're entering into yet another big one. So building resilience, I guess, is going to be ever more important for young people. And it's coming up on a lot of the messages I get, opportunities for mentoring young people. And so I guess there's some awareness that we need to build those connections with young people to get them ready for the difficulties that will soon arise if haven't already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Absolutely.
And I think I would just add on a very practical basis, so this is very immediate, recruitment is obviously now predominantly video conference based, and I think I've done quite a lot of interviews over the last 3 months, and I think there is a new skill to be learned, because often whilst telephone interviews were quite normal across the industry, it often always followed up with some form of face-to-face interaction, and that's not the case. So I think that there is some skills around tightening up your interview experience and practice through video conference So I think sometimes being in your own house doesn't add the same, I suppose, focus that being in a corporate office or an interview room. And actually sometimes you can sense that there's a kind of much more relaxed approach to the interview process. So I think that the candidates that stand out for me are the candidates who are still applying the same level of, you know, precision to their recruitment answers whilst they're doing it on video conference. So there is something around practicing with people, doing mock interviews through video conference, because that kind of acquisition routes for colleagues is likely to stay video conference based. So learning how to do that would be a useful skill for people.
I think that's a great point, Maria, because of course we have this merging where we use Zoom for our, you know, our family quizzes as well as using them for our job interviews, and being able to switch between those identities where we need to be quite precise and concise with our, you know, with our answers and our foci is really important. So that's incredibly useful, and as you say, I don't think that's going to change in the near future. Finally, I just want to turn to one of the questions we've had up, and it's from Adina, and echoing a point made in the chat by Angela, and it said, you know, we must not forget that many workers, especially frontline and low-paid workers, cannot work from home, and I think we've already picked up on this in both Maria and Martin and Leanne and Belgin's discussion, and that there's a kind of risk that on the one hand we're almost creating this two-tier labour market, where on the one hand we have relatively well-paid and quite privileged knowledge workers who are going to benefit long-term from the flexibility, whilst on the other hand we're going to have a group of workers that perhaps have little flexibility or flexibility not on their own terms, and are going to struggle and perhaps may actually lose their jobs. And I guess one of the kind of the question of thoughts is almost an opening there. What can we do about this in terms of, you know, balancing these competing, this danger of a two-tier labour force, where we have people who are very well looked after, and then another group who perhaps are sitting on a time bomb of precarious working and perhaps ill health as well surrounding mental and physical well-being?
I'm happy to start. So I think it is a really difficult balance. I think as well, as we mentioned earlier on, we are still in the middle of the pandemic. So I don't think we've settled on what working practices will be. I don't expect there will be many roles that will be 100% working from home, certainly in banking. There will be some, certainly, but the majority of roles will have a flex, and we will always have, for example, our branch staff have to be in the branches to be able to serve our customers. So I think most organisations have had a mixture between working from home and not working from home for a long time. So I think that duality already exists. It clearly has been made much more stark through COVID. And I think there's a challenge around ensuring that we've done everything we can to allow people to work from home. So I think we had a story earlier on around how we never believed it was possible that all of our people could be working from home. And actually it's really challenging ourselves to see whether we've gone far enough. And then it's about really having a set of policies that focuses on those colleagues who are working in an office environment, to make sure that we can add flexibility. We can think about, are there things that we can do to make that easier for them? Because I think we have to accept that there will always be a duality, and it's around understanding how that impacts those colleagues and what we can do to support it.
Great. Martin, you were going to come in here.
I think the first point is that the kind of assumption that if you can work from home, then you're in a more senior position or higher paid, probably is a bit of a generalisation and not particularly accurate. There's lots of low-paid call centre workers out there who will be working from home, so we need to be careful we don't overly generalise. I think, as was said earlier, I think by Lee, that the need to build flexibility into work patterns for all workers will be part of the solution to this. But I also agree with Maria. You know, I think we're still in the emergency response phase. I don't think we've moved to the kind of unlock phase yet, really. And until that settles down, it'll be difficult to see what those solutions will be. But you know, there will be roles out there where it's very, very difficult to build flexibility. And if we need people to go into people's homes to provide care, then that has to be provided.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you need to get people out of bed in the morning, and you need to put people back into bed at night. You can't do that all between the hours of 12 and 4. The impact on people's quality of life would be devastating. So, you know, some roles just can't be. So it won't be the role. It might be about the work pattern that we have for people, that we create a shift pattern that people are delivering those services in a pattern that suits their own personal circumstances, and that we have that flexibility. But you know, I think other than that, it's really challenging.
Yeah, and I think that picks up on a point that Leanne made earlier about kind of thinking more holistically about the nature of work and how people work and where they work. So I'm just going to, I'm aware of time, so I'm just going to, we've got one final question. Thanks for all the questions, and sorry we can't get to all of them. A question's come in saying, what examples are the panel aware of in large and small organisations where employees are practically offering support in terms of encouraging self-care to avoid burnout? And I think, you know, we started with the concept of burnout, and it's perhaps a useful way to end, because I think everyone feels that we're perhaps sitting on this almost a time bomb of burnout and stress is having an impact. And what are some of the practical things that you've heard about in your own organisation, or the organisations that you're affiliated with, that organisations are doing to avoid that burnout? And I'll just turn to Lee there, because I know that you have a kind of purview of a number of organisations across a number of organisations.
Yeah, it's trying to think about things that I've not already said, because the kind of ways that, so without dwelling too much on the importance of the line manager, I think that there's still continues to be such a focus on that, and needs to continue to be more, so that line managers are trained to have those "are you okay" conversations regularly, and trained, if that's the right word, to pick up the signs and know what to do. So I think we've seen a real focus on that across many of our members and organisations that we work with, which was already happening, but it's just come much more to the fore, and more kind of examples of where organisations are delivering internal campaigns or things to raise awareness of the importance of kind of recognising in yourself that maybe things aren't okay. And I guess for people managers and leaders in the organisation to try and more explicitly role model what kind of good working practice looks like, or, you know, how you kind of balance your kind of work and your life and your family, and kind of role model in a different way. If that's something that's maybe a wee bit new to the discussion.
I think that's a really important point, and something that an organisation like I've been involved in is talking about, the idea of real modelling, where, you know, you actually do, you know, that where leaders actually show that, you know, children will come into your Zoom conversation, or that, you know, things don't work, and actually recognising that that's part of life, and recognising that we're all human in some way. Now we've got a load of questions come in, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But sometimes that's a good sign, because it shows that there's momentum that we can go away and think about some of the fantastic ideas that have been brought up here. So I'm going to unfortunately close there, but I do hope that you've enjoyed. I certainly have, and I'd like to thank Martin, Belgin, Maria, and Lee for joining us. For today's conversations. I know as leaders you're probably on the precipice of exhaustion and a full-on working week, working life, working month, working 6 months anyway. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the audience for your participation, and also for listening in. And before I leave you, I'm just going to let you know that next week is going to be our next series in the Coming Through COVID Sustainably webinar series. And what we're going to be focusing on there is a kind of broad economic overview of the COVID-19 landscape. So we're going to be joined by Samina Akram, who is a celebrity from Samak Ethical Finance, one of the leaders in thinking about women and in finance. We have Brian Henderson, who's joining us from Mercer, Omar Sheikh, who is the CEO for the Global Ethical Finance Initiative, and Michele Battisti, who is a finance member of faculty at Adam Smith Business School. So I'd welcome you to join us all, but in the meantime, I'd like to say thank you so much to the panel, and thank you to the audience for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you next week.
Thanks.
Okay, and that's us clear. Perfect, that's great. I'll just ask you to Bilgin, if you're just here.